Hey, everyone, and thanks for joining today's episode of the Datavana podcast. Today, I have founder and CEO of Zoominfo, Henry Schuck. Henry, how are you?
Good. How are you, Jamie? Thank you for having me.
I'm good. Pleasure to have you. So I'd love to just get started and dive right in and see how the data space has evolved since you got started and founded DiscoverOrg back in 2007.
Yeah. I founded DiscoverOrg in 2007, but I've actually been in this space since 2002 when I worked for a similar company called iProfile. And I think one of the most interesting things about that time, and I'll tell you kind of what iProfile did and how the world changed when we made like this little discovery. But what iProfile had been doing was really gathering up a bunch of research on what a company was doing inside of their internal IT departments. And we gathered it by literally going to a library and pulling off the microfiche. I don't know if anybody knows what microfiche is anymore, but it was basically like a reel of like magazines and newspapers that was archived in a way that you could read it. And we'd pull these articles and we'd pull every article written about Ford's IT department together. And then we put it in a PDF, and we did this across the Fortune 1000, basically the Fortune 100, then the Fortune 500, then the Fortune 1000. We batched them together, and then we sold these reports to companies. We'd say, hey, you're a technology company selling into the IT departments of Fortune 1000 companies. Here's 1,000 in-depth reports that tell you what's going on in those companies. And people loved those. And then one day we were having a conversation with the vice president of sales at one of these companies. And he goes, look, these reports are great. They're super valuable. I totally understand what's going on at the company. But you know what? At the end of the day, I got to do something with this.
Right.
And this doesn't help me at all when it comes to making a sale, understanding who buys products and services at the company, understanding what the organizational chart looks like. I have no visibility at all into that. And I don't have a way to contact them. So how are you going to help me with that? And so this is 2002, and there is no LinkedIn. There is no Facebook. There is no Zoominfo. There is no way to actually know who the decision makers inside of a company are. You just don't know.
Right.
And so the biggest value, the most valuable thing companies had were these super expensive sales reps who were going around the country, building their network, taking people out to expensive ball games and dinners, and they had all the right country club memberships to build their network of professionals who worked at companies. And then they were leveraging that Rolodex to help big companies sell their products and services. And that's how they went to market, because you didn't know who was inside, GM's IT department. Nobody knew that. And so you had to build these relationships. And so when the idea of CRM came along, that was such a powerful moment for companies, because they said, you know what? We can get that really valuable Rolodex that our sales reps own, and we can get it in our central CRM. So when that guy leaves, at least I know what his relationships look like and who the people at those companies are. And so they rushed behind this CRM movement, and they just said, look, this is now a digital Rolodex. Put all your information in. That's where we want it. And sales rep put it in because it helped them kind of for themselves. It gave them a digital Rolodex, and companies had access to it. And then they didn't really do much else when it came to really modernizing and digitizing their go-to-market efforts. They had the data and CRM, and that was it. And you fast forward to the world now, where at iProfile, when we heard that comment from that VP of sales, we started collecting the contact information and the organizational charts of the people who worked at those companies, because we wanted to enable our customers to take that next step with the data. And what we learned there was, not only did it empower the largest companies in the world, but it also really democratized the way sales happened. Because all of a sudden, you didn't really need to have these relationships and these big Rolodexes to go to market anymore. All of a sudden, the sales rep who was selling a product from Boise could easily compete with the sales rep selling IBM or Microsoft or Oracle, who was based in San Francisco or New York City, who had the best relationships and the biggest Rolodex.
Yeah.
And so what I really think has happened is data has really democratized the way companies can sell. You think about like the regional aspect of this as well. Like if you were based in Alabama, your customers were other companies in Alabama. Like
Right.
that was it. You didn't know, like in 2002, how many 200 employee companies there were in California or Arizona or Nevada or Washington. There's no
Right.
way you could sell anything to those guys. And now all of a sudden, we talked about in our IPO, we have a company that makes tents for outdoor events, selling to hospitals out of Michigan, selling to hospitals in Texas and New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Washington State. And so really this data has I don't want to say has globalized or nationalized your ability to sell across state lines, has made companies able to compete with companies that were much larger than them just by basis of having a level playing field when it came to data on their potential targets. And that's super powerful.
Yeah. No,
now, this, Jamie, like in the process, we made a mess of our CRM systems, right? We just said like, yeah, put your stuff in, hurry, put it all in. We need all of that stuff in here. And then we didn't do anything about like setting rules for that, normalizing the data, cleansing the data, enriching the data. People move from job to job. There's no system in CRM that like makes any effort to track that. Like you ask everybody who owns a CRM system or any senior VP of sales, like, hey, tell me true or false, people leave their jobs. True. What are you doing in your CRM system to keep track of that? Well, our sales reps do it. No, they don't.
No, they don't. Yeah. And how do they even know? Right.
Yeah. So it's super interesting. The world that we've come to now is we've got these CRM systems that have, 2 decades of data in it from everywhere, right? Not just sales reps. We also said marketing buys a list, put it in.
Yeah,
Go to an event conference, scan a badge, put it in. Fill out a form on the website, put it in. And so now it's just like all this mess of data and no one really knows how to clean it up and make it useful and actionable. And that's where we are right now. We pumped it into our CRM systems, our marketing automation systems. We've expected that these systems give us value in the future. And we have done nothing from a data hygiene perspective, from a cleanliness perspective, from an enrichment and completeness perspective to really be able to get the value out of those systems.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was interviewing a CEO of a great customer of yours, Gainsight, Nick Mehta. And Nick and I were talking about basically how you're never, when you're talking about your go-to market strategy and you're talking about your enrichment and your TAM and your ICP and all of that, and you're identifying the right data provider, which obviously Nick, thought was Zoominfo. But the challenge is getting that data into the CRM, right? There's never this kind of blank slate opportunity of where it's a net new company with a net new TAM who knows their ICP and they're just bringing in, I'm going to sell to this industry. Like God bless the Series A or the seed round companies that the CEO has no idea how lucky he is that he just came out with this brilliant idea and he has an opportunity to just start from scratch and start fresh. And I agree. We're all realizing that we've just been throwing data in, not really understanding how to handle it and how to solve for the data decay. And I think that's what's so powerful and so cool with going to market, from a Ringlead perspective with you at Zoominfo as partners and really tackling that together, because being able to leverage the Zoominfo data set and then operationalize it and harmonize it to our joint customers, we're just seeing so much success. So with that, Henry, where do you see the next like big opportunity for growth within Zoominfo? Obviously, you've been making very strategic acquisitions with Clickagy and Everstring recently. where do you see that next phase of growth? Like how are you going to continue the growth that you've guys, I mean, with your recent, quarterly filing, I mean, it's crazy how much growth that you guys are having. How do you see sustaining that moving forward?
Yeah, so that is the multi-billion-dollar question.
Right.
It's one I think about all the time. And really, what's super interesting about the way my job has changed is every year that goes by with the growth that we're having, I'm looking out like further and further into the future.
Right. Yeah.
And if you asked me, and Nick is a good friend, by the way, but if you asked me 4 years ago, or if you told me 4 years ago, let's say I met a CEO and the CEO told me like, hey, what do you spend? I go, what do you spend most of your time on? They told me like, I'm really planning for 2-3 years in the future. Yeah. I would have been like, that guy's garbage. He doesn't do anything. Like, he doesn't know how to execute. Like, yeah, I'm sure it's fun to sit in your ivory tower and think about what 3 years of the future looks like while I'm like cranking execution
Still
every
on the
day
phone.
in my business.
Yeah.
But today, if you want to be a 30-40% grower for years and years and years and years in the future, you really do have to be thinking about like 2 years from now, what is it that the market is going to want?
Where's the puck going? Yep. Exactly.
Where's the puck going? And I think what's super interesting, I just read this article. I've got this article right here, actually. I was just reading. It's a Harvard Business Review article. It's called Automation to Boost Sales and Marketing.
Yeah.
And I was reading it today. And let me read you, because it's super interesting. Let me read you like just 2 things from it. And then you can tell me, Jamie, I want you to guess when it was written. So, okay. Investments in marketing and sales automation systems hold tremendous potential for productivity improvements. The importance of marketing and sales services is growing. Hold on. Despite the worth of this proven technology, few companies have automated any part of their marketing and sales functions. Even fewer appear to understand the significant strategic benefits that can accrue from marketing and sales automations. What do the systems do? Here are examples of what the systems do. Sales productivity tools, planning and reporting of sales calls, entering orders, order status, tracking leads, and managing accounts. Telemarketing, merging, cleaning, and maintaining calling lists, subsetting lists or markets, tracking and forwarding leads, ranking prospects, and prompting scripts, sales customer service and support. Sales and marketing management, providing automated sales management reports, designing and managing sales territories, analyzing marketing and sales programs by such criteria as market territory, product, customer type, price, and channel. These systems can automate the work of a single salesperson, a single marketing activity, or an entire marketing and sales operation. What year?
2012?
1989. 1989.
Oh, man.
It's insane, right? Like,
That
we have
is
not
wild.
automated or digitized the way we go to market in any real meaningful way in 30 years. We're having the exact same conversation. I mean, we're using different words. Like, they call this MSP, marketing and sales productivity. We don't call it that anymore, but we're talking about the exact same thing 31 years later, 32 years later, which is really crazy, right? And it makes you realize how little we've actually invested behind getting the sales motion right and automated at companies. Yeah. And so when I look forward, first I look backwards, right? Like, what are the things that we're talking about 30 years ago that we're still talking about today? Right. And then how far along on that journey are we? And where are we going to be 3 years from now? And I still think that fundamentally all of that begins with a foundational investment in data that drives your systems of record,
Absolutely.
but turns those systems of record into systems of insight. And I think that's where we're missing today is we have these systems of record, but they don't really provide us any insight. And they're not really being adopted by our frontline sellers because they're just filled with a bunch of garbage.
Yeah.
And so really, I think that's a foundational layer that's still going to be here. I think that when you, someone called it on a call with me, one of our enterprise customers the other day called it infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Data is infrastructure to the go-to-market technology
like
stack.
That.
That's right. It is infrastructure. Right. It is like what the core piece that you need in order to do everything else you want to do. You want to automate sales and marketing. You want to be in front of customers when they're going to buy your products and services. You want to automate your sales reps' motions. That data is the infrastructure for you to be able to do that. So I don't think that's
100%.
changing.
Yeah, it's funny because, Henry, I actually interviewed Max Altschuler, a good friend of mine, and we were talking about where does sales engagement intersect with RevOps. It was actually on a different podcast of mine, a RevOps podcast, and out of that conversation, we were basically talking about how data is the fuel for every go-to-market engine and in every investment, and you can invest in sales automation. Obviously, outreach is definitely one of the leaders in that. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the right email and you don't have the right phone number and you can't build segments and you can't identify your total addressable market and you don't have intent to understand actually who to prioritize within your ICP, it doesn't matter. And so, I mean, I think, right.
You need the infrastructure.
Right.
All this stuff that we're trying to do, that we have big grand visions for, needs a foundational layer of infrastructure. And I believe that in the go-to-market world is data. The other thing that's pretty clear to me is there's this Jeff Bezos quote where they asked Jeff Bezos, like, what's going to change 10 years from now?
Yep.
And he goes, I don't really think that much about what's going to change, but I do spend a good amount of time thinking about things that I believe are going to be the same.
Yeah.
And he goes, when you start thinking about things that are going to be the same 10 years from now, it gives you the opportunity to invest a lot in those things today because they're not going to change.
Right.
And in his world, what he said was Amazon customers will always want the lowest prices and the fastest delivery times.
Right.
There's
For the last
no
20
way
years, that's what he's been saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And 10 years from now, no one's going to be like, I love Amazon. I wish they charged me more and delivered slower though.
Right.
So that's always going to be the same.
Right.
So in our world, I think a lot about that question. And one of the places that is very clear to me is customers are going to want to be in front of potential customers of theirs when they are about to buy a product or service like theirs.
Right.
No question about it. Everybody's going to want to be in front of their buyers as early as possible when they're in market for their types of products and services. You don't want to miss an opportunity. People are getting smarter about signing multi-year contracts, 3, 5, 7-year contracts. You can be locked out of an opportunity for a long time. And so being in front of your opportunities when they're in market, 10 years from now, no one's going to be like, what? I just don't want to be in front of the companies when they're thinking about buying products or services of mine.
Right.
So we can invest a lot today behind making sure that we're bringing together the right signals to put our customers in front of their potential customers when they're in market for their products and services. That's another area where I think, we'll continue to invest behind.
Where I see an analogy to that also is obviously, it's intent is really that kind of last phase, that last step. I mean, 10 years ago, ideal customer profiling was kind of there, but it was really even back then just TAM. Like what is your total addressable market? Then it honed in on what's your ideal customer profile. And now it's who's going to buy and why. And that's more from like an outbound go-to market. And Henry, where I see parity with that or analogy with that is from an inbound perspective. When someone raises their hand and they say, hey, I'm actually interested now,
Yep.
the statistics and the studies are around who actually gets in front of that buyer first is
Yep.
incredible. I mean,
Totally.
it's unbelievable to actually that those statistics are even real. 75%, you're the first person to reach out to them. They could be a laggard, but based on just them getting in front of them, they're still going to win that business. And I think one thing that is really exciting it through our partnership is being able to provide the Zoominfo asset to our joint customers in real time so they can then use that information to restructure the data, normalize it, build segments, do lead to account matching, and then routing in
And then
seconds.
route it.
And
Yep.
we were having a conversation last week with a joint customer, and the economic buyer literally on the call said it was taking them 2 to 3 days on average to route leads. And you could see
Oh my
my
God.
eyes light up, obviously. And I said, well,
You
I
might
think
as well
you're,
just
I-
light money on
right,
fire.
right. So I said, I can imagine that it would be valuable if we could do that in seconds. And he actually thought that I was kidding. And it was on a joint call with our, our joint teams. And we said, no, we're not kidding. We have, customers that are actually saying that for them, we thought an hour was a really long time. And then we went to seconds. But I think that had parity when you were talking about that intent, because it's very similar. It's really about getting in front of them first and getting in front
Yep.
of them when they want to, when they're actually in market.
Yeah.
So I
I
never
mean, the
really thought
best
about
source
that
of
being
intent.
similar, but yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the best source of intent is when someone fills out a form on your website.
Right.
It's
That's
giving you the best lead
right.
possible. Somebody
Right.
says like, yeah, I just spent time on your website and I'd
Right.
like you to
I'm
call me.
ready. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
To
So
not be able to
you should
get
probably
that
get in
person
front
on
of
the
them.
phone, yeah, in 90 seconds is like
Right.
it's malfeasance. And
Right.
like I run this thing where like if I speak at a conference, I take the conference attendees and I go and fill out a lead on their website, and then I track when they respond, how fast they respond. What percentage? And by the way, I'm a good like prospect now, right? Like I'm a big company. You have every reason to
I
respond
should
to me when I
probably be
fill out your form.
responding. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. What percentage of the people do you think even respond at all?
Oh, I don't know. Not a high.
48% of people of the companies responded at all.
It's
So
incredible.
54% of the companies are not responding to any lead that gets filled out on their website. And there are all sorts of like, issues that can be causing that.
Right.
Marketing spending all this money to drive people to the website, to get them to fill out the form. Then that's getting sent to sales. And for whatever reason, or it's not getting sent to sales, they fill out this form and there's no system or process to get that form immediately in the hands of a sales rep to call that person back right away and move it down the funnel. It's like, it's just.
Do you know why I think that? Why I think that is sometimes, definitely not all of the time.
Yep.
But I think that a big role in that is all of these different technology vendors in the mix, right?
Yep.
There's 4 or 5 or 6 different systems that are basically it's intended to work harmoniously together, but they don't. And when there's marketing automation involved, there's API issues and timeouts and degradation and latency. And I think that's one of the real challenges that when we unpack that in the enterprise and we say, why is it taking, 2 or 3 days has never happened. That's the longest I've ever heard. But oftentimes it's, a couple hours. And that seems like a lifetime. Like an SLA should be like 5 minutes. I think 60 seconds is aggressive. 5 minutes probably is there. And
you
when we
can pull it
unpack that,
off. Gives you a lot of time to get it right.
Right. And there's multiple vendors that are performing one little small thing in that. There's, enrichment, and then there's normalizing, and then there's attribution, and there's all of these different things that it's well intended. That the owner of that group they have good intentions. And I think that's another really, great opportunity that we have jointly by being able to integrate the data and then perform those necessary functions is something that obviously the market is really enjoying. So
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
one thing, Henry, I wanted to dive in. Obviously, there's 2020 was a really weird year. I think everybody can agree, and in 2021 seems kind of eerie also, and kind of what's the future going to look like. I know you're familiar with Andy Grove's strategic inflection points. Where do you feel like we're at one now? I mean, do you feel like that we're at that inflection point from the economy and just kind of where we're at with inflation and all of the money that's been pouring in from the VC ecosystem for the past 10, 12, 15 years? Where do you see that kind of, what's going to be the ramification of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think in our business, I really don't think we're at an inflection point yet. I still think in our respective businesses, we're still like in super early adopter mode.
Yeah.
Um, which seems kind of crazy. We have 20,000 customers, um, but the use cases vary, wildly from
Right.
really sophisticated use cases for small companies to really unsophisticated use cases for really big companies to really
Right.
sophisticated use cases for big companies. Um, so I really do think we're still super, super early in our space from a digital transformation perspective. And
Yeah. That's what I was going to
obviously,
say. Yeah.
it takes a long time, right? Like 1989, we were talking about
That is
all of the
wild.
different, yeah, and we're 30 years in. And I don't know how meaningful of steps we've taken. I mean, probably some of them are meaningful. We have, like you said, we have a lot of the technology to automate the motions,
Right.
to make us super effective and efficient in our go-to-market motion. We're just not particularly tying it all together.
Right.
Um, and I think part of that is, look, I'm 37. So I went to college between '01 and '05. And I had an MIS class that was required in the business school,
Yeah.
but that was it. And
Right.
so, like, the people who are kind of running the show at most of the enterprises out there are either my age or older,
Right.
which means like they didn't particularly come up in a world that taught you how to tie systems together and how to take like human processes and automate them with a systems design and how to get multiple things working together and how to leverage APIs to normalize data and how to like plug in, how to get sales efficiency out of your sales force by leveraging insights and data. And so I still think we're very, very early. The younger group of executives and leaders in businesses, I think they come at everything with a systems mindset.
Yeah.
And so as they continue to make their way into the enterprise and up the ladder, I
Yeah. That
think you'll
makes sense.
see us hit an inflection point. I just don't think we're there yet.
I I
I mean,
think
I was on a call the other day with one of the largest companies in the world, and they told me that their sales team of like 500 reps manages 25,000 accounts.
wow.
And I said, tell me across those 25,000 accounts, like, how are you keeping tabs on it? Like,
Right.
things are changing constantly within those accounts. People are leaving, people are coming, the company's growing.
I think that there'll be players that evolve competitively. And I think that you'll see some of the laggards fall off and get consolidated and acquired. And I think that that's actually probably right for the buyers,
Yeah.
for
Yep.
the ecosystem, because man, they are confused. And
Totally.
I think that there's a lack of prescription in the space. It used to be that Gartner would come out and Forrester would come out with the recommended best practices. And they still do a good job of that. But the ecosystem has just gotten so vast, they can't keep up. These analysts can't keep up with
Mhm.
10,000 different, you know, solutions that have different overlapping functionality in
Mhm.
technology. And I think that's really what the ecosystem needs is they need more prescribed best practice. They need to
Mhm.
understand that basically everybody has the same problem. I mean, I look at your business and our business. It's as simple as in a B2B environment and B2C, but in a B2B environment, companies just want to know who their sellers are and they want their information. It's
Yep.
really that simple,
Yep.
and I think that
Buyers, but yes.
yes, buyers. And I
Yeah.
think that we have really dramatically overcomplicated that with 50 to 100 technology vendors in a
Mhm.
go-to market. I mean, it's absurd. Basically, they just want to know who their who their buyers are, and um, I think that is really the kind of the inflection point that we're going to see from a consolidation perspective for sure.
Yeah. Totally. I agree. Totally agree.
What disruptive kind of technologies and market trends are you seeing in the landscape right now?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think a lot about technologies that I believe that every sales rep should be using, where it has broad applicability to kind of any sales rep, any sales manager, any sales vice president. I think when I think about those technologies, I think a lot about, I think conversational intelligence is definitely one of those. So
Yeah,
it doesn't matter what kind of sales manager you are and what industry of what size, being able to listen to your reps calls on your
absolutely.
time in your time frame and do coaching, that's important for companies of any size in any industry. If you've got an account executive and a manager, you need that technology at your fingertips. I think about chat on a website
Yep.
is an important one. It's not really going to go away. I'm always going to want to be in front of my potential buyers when they're on my website, and if I can do that in an effective way using a chatbot, I think
Right.
that's still going to be here. So I think those are still both very early, but also it would be hard to imagine a world in a future where that's not being used.
Yeah, that makes sense. I totally agree. Some of the market trends that I think are really interesting is around. Did I? So some of the biggest trends that I see is really around product led growth, and I think it comes back down to we think a lot in terms of in terms of sales enablement, but I don't think we've thought enough about buyer enablement. And I think at the end of the day, buyers really they want to have transparency, and they want to have transparency into pricing. They want to they don't want to wonder if they're getting a good deal, things like that. And I also think from a product led growth perspective, getting into the product, getting free access to it, is just from an economic lever is really powerful. I remember, meeting with Atlassian in their office years
Mhm.
ago, and their buyer literally told me, "I don't care if I have the right emails and the right phone numbers, because they're going to basically buy from me if they want to." And I was like, "Geez, must be nice." And this was like probably 5 or 6 years ago. And if you look at valuations of Atlassian and HubSpot, from a product led growth perspective, it's all about CAC and LTV, and I really think that that's a trend that we're going to see continue. I don't think that we're going to see any sort of reversal there. And I
Yep.
also think another trend that I'm seeing is value in usage based pricing.
Mhm.
I think that the market is really going to demand that. I don't think that that's going to happen in the next year or so, but I really do think in the 5 to 10 year time frame, like from now, buyers are going to come to really command and demand that. What are your thoughts on that type of pricing model, Henry?
Yeah, I think two things. One, on the product led growth side of things, I would say I think what's super interesting is when you can marry product led growth with a sales organization that's still helping you sell into the enterprise or is a
Oh,
little bit
you're
more
always
high
going to have
touch
to
when you
sell
need
into.
it.
Yep. Yep.
The best companies are the ones who can get them both right.
Yes.
And those are super powerful companies. So it's not one way or another. And if you're like an early stage founder, I wouldn't hide your disdain for selling by just focusing only on product-led growth. I think that's not the right thing to do. But I do think that model's here to stay. I also think usage-based pricing is usage-based or value-based pricing is going to be here to stay as well. The thing that I would say there is like the buyer matters in those kinds of models. And when you're selling directly to like an IT buyer or a technical buyer, an engineering or IT buyer, whose job it is to like build creative solutions to big problems at a company, who also have lots of budget to make those decisions and fix those problems. That's just a different buyer than when you're selling to like a VP of sales and they just don't have like the huge budgets that engineering has to solve problems. And they're like relying on other places in the organization to kind of solve the technical issues. So I think like the buyer matters. I think it's a lot harder to sell a product-led growth solution into the sales organization actually than it is to sell it into IT or engineering. So I just think that would be the only caveat. The best companies who are doing sort of usage-based growth their buyers are engineering technical led buyers. I haven't seen that work in the sales or marketing ecosystem yet.
Yeah. All right, Henry. Well, let's end on what are you most excited about? Like you woke up today, you've been waking up thinking about stuff. What are you most excited about in the near term?
Jimmy, this is such an easy question because it is March 9th, 2021, and I have not gotten a vaccine yet. And so I am most excited about getting a vaccine and getting back to some sense of normalcy. I'd like to travel. I'd like to see, we hired half of our staff in the midst of the pandemic. We opened 2 new offices. Yeah. I'd like to see some of them again. I'd like to meet with my executive team in a room again. I'd like to whiteboard, strategic motions. I have a new chief marketing officer I've never met in person. I have a board member I've never met in person. I have an entire company that we acquired that I've never met in person. And so I would like the opportunity to get the vaccine and get back out there to meet some of our team members.
Right on. All right, everybody. This is Henry and Jaime signing off. Thanks for listening.